The neighborhood of Maple Hollow looked like something straight out of a postcard: neat lawns, trimmed hedges, and identical houses that whispered perfection through their symmetry. But beneath that spotless surface lived something darker, a force of control and bitterness that ruled through fake smiles and HOA notices. Her name was Margaret Ellison. Everyone called her Maggie, though behind closed doors she was known by another name, the Pumpkin Witch of Maple Hollow. Maggie hated anything that disrupted her illusion of order. Music, laughter, even wind chimes offended her. Every fall she went into a frenzy when the orange lights began to glow across porches, claiming Halloween was a disgrace to decent living. To her, joy was chaos and children dressed as monsters were a personal attack. But this year someone was challenging her reign. Ethan Cole had moved into 43 Maple Drive, a wide-shouldered craftsman home with an old oaken front and a wraparound porch perfect for decorating. Ethan was quiet, a craftsman and sculptor by trade, but when October came he transformed his yard into a spectacle. Towering scarecrows, fog machines, carved pumpkins that seemed to breathe fire from within, every piece made by his own hands. For the first time in years, Maple Hollow felt alive, and Maggie couldn't stand it. The letters began the next day, typed, folded with precision, left in his mailbox. Remove the decorations immediately. HOA violation 3.2, unsafe lighting, improper lawn usage. Ethan ignored them. More letters followed, then threats of fines. Still, he didn't stop. Instead, he added more pumpkins, more lights, and a massive centerpiece, a 10-foot jack-o'-lantern carved from fiberglass, glowing like an ember at night. Inside, a motion sensor made it laugh when people walked by. It was eerie, hypnotic, and beautiful. As the days passed, Maggie's obsession grew. She walked by his house every evening, scribbling in her notebook, muttering under her breath. Neighbors began to notice her peering through their windows, watching the decorations as if they were alive. On Halloween Eve, she snapped. She filed an official complaint with the HOA, demanding his property be inspected and cleared before dawn. When no one responded, she decided to handle it herself. That night, under a cold October moon, Maggie crept across Ethan's lawn with a bucket of gasoline and a lighter. The air was still, the fog heavy, and every carved pumpkin seemed to be watching her. Their flickering eyes followed her as she poured the liquid along the path, whispering about cleaning up the filth. Her hands shook, but her anger burned hotter than the chill in the air. She wanted to erase the glow, the laughter, the defiance. But something shifted when she reached the massive jack-o'-lantern in the center of the yard. It towered over her, grinning, hollow-eyed, alive in a way no plastic should be. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves like whispers. The air grew colder, thicker. She hesitated, lighter in hand, staring into the jack-o'-lantern's wide smile. Then a sound, not from behind her, not from the house, but from within the pumpkin. A low, wet gurgle, a pulse, then a whisper that seemed to crawl through the air. Leave. Maggie froze, the lighter slipped from her hand and clattered against the stone. She took a step back, her breath visible in the moonlight. The pumpkin's grin widened impossibly. The carved edges curled as if melting into flesh, and the glow within turned from orange to deep blood red. The air reeked of smoke and something sweet like burnt sugar and rot. Maggie turned to run, but the ground beneath her seemed to grab her ankles. The vines that lined the walkway twitched, coiling around her shoes. She screamed silently as the fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the street, muffling the world. The pumpkin pulsed again, and then everything went still. When morning came, Ethan stepped out onto his porch. The air smelled faintly of rain. Every decoration stood exactly where it should, untouched. But the massive jack-o'-lantern, it was different. Its grin was sharper now, its surface glossier, almost organic. Inside its hollow, something faint shimmered like an eye-catching light. The neighbors said they hadn't seen Maggie since the night before. Her house was dark, her blinds drawn. The HOA president shrugged, saying maybe she went to visit family. But Ethan knew. Deep down, he knew something had changed that night. Because sometimes when the wind was just right and the fog thick enough, the jack-o'-lantern laughed, not with the motion sensor's hollow sound, but with something else. A strained human laugh. One that echoed through the street, sharp and cracked like it was trapped inside. And on the inside of the pumpkin's grin, carved faintly beneath the surface, a new mark had appeared. The letters ME etched in from the inside out like fingernails scraping to get free. Ethan didn't touch it. He only smiled, lit the candle again, and whispered to himself that Halloween had never looked better. But Maple Hollow would never be the same. Because the jack-o'-lantern at 43 Maple Drive wasn't just a decoration anymore. It had a soul now, one that wasn't going anywhere. Days passed in uneasy silence. Maple Hollow had always been a place of whispers, but now the murmurs carried fear. The absence of Margaret Ellison was like a missing piece in a perfect puzzle, unsettling, noticeable, wrong. Her house, once spotless, began to decay. Leaves piled on her porch, newspapers gathered at her door, and the mailbox overflowed. Yet no one dared knock. They said she was out of town, but her curtains never moved. At night, some swore they saw a faint orange light flickering through the slats, the same hue as the jack-o'-lantern glowing across the street. Meanwhile, Ethan's Halloween display still stood proudly. The fog machines puffed, the pumpkins flickered, and the towering jack-o'-lantern grinned wider than ever. But something about it had changed. The glow inside wasn't mechanical anymore. It pulsed, slow, deliberate, alive. Neighbors felt it too. Children stopped playing near Ethan's yard. Dogs barked uncontrollably when passing by. Even the air seemed different, heavy with a scent of smoke and decay. Still, Ethan said nothing. He went about his business as if unaware of the dread his lawn inspired. Then came the HOA. With Margaret missing, Vice President Carol Jennings stepped into her role, a sharp-featured woman with pearls that seemed to choke her neck. She was the type who mistook order for morality, and Maggie had been her idol. When she heard Ethan refused to remove his decorations past Halloween, she saw an opportunity to restore control. The official notice arrived first. All holiday decor must be removed by November 2nd. Failure to comply will result in fines and forced removal. Ethan ignored it. By the third warning, Carol assembled the HOA board. They stood outside 43 Maple Drive in the crisp morning air, armed with clipboards, cameras, and that smug righteousness that only comes from power unchecked. They expected confrontation, but Ethan didn't appear. The house was quiet. Only the low hum of the fog machine broke the stillness. The jack-o'-lantern towered before them, half shrouded in mist. Its grin was carved deep, almost predatory. Carol frowned. "Just a prop," she muttered, signaling the maintenance worker to haul it away. But when the man approached, the air seemed to shift, colder, thicker, heavier. The moment his hand touched the pumpkin's surface, he jerked back, swearing it was hot. "Like it's alive," he said, trembling. Carol rolled her eyes and grabbed it herself. The pumpkin's skin felt smooth, almost soft, like skin stretched over bone. She recoiled instinctively, but pride pushed her forward. She yanked at it again, determined to prove her authority. The base didn't budge. Instead, the vines coiled around its stem twitched, slithering across the ground toward her shoes. The worker backed away. "Cut the vines," she ordered, but the man shook his head. The vines were moving on their own now, writhing through the soil, curling toward the other's feet. A faint hum filled the air, a vibration that wasn't from any machine. And then from inside the jack-o'-lantern came that sound, a muffled human laugh. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't recorded, it was wet, strained, like someone choking on air. The HOA members froze. The pumpkin's light flared blood red, illuminating their pale faces. The air filled with the smell of burnt sugar and something fouler, like charred meat. Carol stumbled back, clutching her pearl necklace. Her clipboard dropped to the ground, papers scattering across the grass. The laughter deepened, echoing through the yard. The fog thickened, curling like smoke around their ankles. Then, as quickly as it began, the light flickered out. Silence. They left that day without saying a word. By evening, every neighbor had heard the story. Some called it superstition, others said it was electrical wiring, but everyone avoided Ethan's yard. Carol filed a report claiming potential hazardous material but never returned to enforce it. That night, Ethan sat on his porch, watching the jack-o'-lantern flicker gently in the dark. He knew what the HOA didn't, that something inside that pumpkin wasn't going anywhere. He could feel it watching him, whispering in the quiet. Sometimes he thought he could hear Maggie's voice beneath the laughter, calling from within, begging to be released. But there was no release, not for her. The following morning, Carol Jennings didn't show up for her daily jog. Her husband found her car still in the driveway, her phone on the counter, her coffee half full. The only thing missing was her. And later that week, neighbors noticed something new about Ethan's display. The jack-o'-lantern's grin had changed again, deeper, crueler, and on its lower lip, faintly carved, were two new letters. CJ. The HOA met in secret after that. They discussed removing the pumpkin by force, maybe even demolishing the entire lawn. But each plan ended in silence. Every person who volunteered seemed to find a reason to back out. Because deep down, everyone in Maple Hollow felt it, a silent warning, a presence that made the air hum and the night stretch longer. Something inside that jack-o'-lantern didn't want to be touched. And as the first November rain began to fall, Ethan simply stood on his porch, lit a candle, and smiled as the pumpkin's eyes glowed again, brighter than before. By the time November settled over Maple Hollow, the neighborhood had fallen quiet, too quiet. The bright, cheerful decorations that once lined the porches had vanished, replaced with emptiness. Families stayed indoors after dusk. The streets, once alive with laughter and distant chatter, now seemed frozen in a permanent hush. And in the center of it all, standing like a glowing sentinel of defiance, was the jack-o'-lantern at 43 Maple Drive. Its light never went out. Even as the autumn winds turned sharp and the fog thickened to a milky haze, that orange-red glow burned steadily. It pulsed through the mist like a heartbeat, faint, rhythmic, alive. Some nights, neighbors claimed they heard faint scratching from Ethan's yard. Others spoke of voices, hushed, urgent whispers weaving through the wind. They said the pumpkin talked when the street was empty. They said it called names. Ethan never denied it, he just watched. Every evening he lit a fresh candle inside it, staring into the carved grin as though waiting for it to respond. He begun sleeping with his porch light off, letting only the pumpkin's glow spill across his yard. It cast long, crooked shadows through his windows, shapes that moved when nothing else did. The first to notice something new was old Mr. Drummond, who lived across the street. He woke one night to see the jack-o'-lantern's mouth moving, the flicker inside shifting with unnatural rhythm, as if something behind the carved grin was speaking. He could almost make out words, low and broken, rising above the hum of the fog machine. And then he saw it, a shape behind the pumpkin's hollow eyes. A faint silhouette pressing against the inside like hands pushing from within. The next morning he called the police. By noon a patrol car idled outside Ethan's house. The officers walked the yard, inspected the decorations, and found nothing unusual. They laughed it off, another Maple Hollow superstition. They told the neighbors to get some sleep. That night both officers disappeared on their way home. Their cruiser was found abandoned near the cul-de-sac, engine running, doors open. The dashcam footage showed only a blur of fog and a faint orange light flickering in the distance. After that, no one laughed. Ethan kept his silence. He worked during the day, vanished at dusk, and returned before dawn. No one knew what he was doing, but strange sounds echoed from his garage, hammering, sawing, faint chanting that didn't sound entirely human. Soon, other pumpkins appeared on his lawn. Not the plastic kind, not foam or fiberglass, real ones. Each carved with grotesque precision, each glowing from within though no flame could be seen. They formed a half-circle around the massive jack-o'-lantern like worshippers kneeling before their god. The HOA met again, but the board was smaller now. Carol was gone, Maggie was gone, and no one wanted to step foot near 43 Maple Drive. They drafted letters from a distance, threatening fines, citing bylaws, anything to feel in control, but none were delivered. The mail carrier refused. Something was changing in the neighborhood. The leaves refused to fall from the trees near Ethan's yard, their veins darkening like dried blood. Birds no longer landed on his fence. Even the air buzzed differently, thicker, charged. Like the moment before a lightning strike. Then one night the whispers grew louder. It began just after midnight, a soft murmur carried by the wind, 100 voices layered and trembling echoing through the streets. At first it was hard to tell where it came from, but as the wind died the sound became clear. It was coming from Ethan's yard. The jack-o'-lantern was glowing brighter than ever, a crimson hue that bathed the entire street in light. The smaller pumpkins flickered like candles in a cathedral. The whispering built into a chorus, an endless chant of names, of regrets, of pleading. The sound drew the neighbors to their windows, frozen in fear. And then, through the glowing grin, something shifted inside the great pumpkin. The silhouette that had once pressed faintly now moved fully, a distorted face pushing against the inner walls. Eyes bulged against the carved sockets, mouth stretching in a silent scream. The carved edges split slightly, dripping a thick amber fluid that hissed when it touched the ground. The voice inside grew frantic, begging, clawing. It was Margaret, everyone knew it. Her voice, warped and broken, echoed through the air. She called for help. She cried for release, but no one moved. Not a soul in Maple Hollow dared step outside, and then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light dimmed to its normal orange glow. The street fell silent again. But something new had appeared in the yard, a small wooden sign planted directly in front of the jack-o'-lantern. No one saw Ethan place it there. It simply appeared overnight. The sign read, "Obedience is protection." No one understood what it meant, but from that night forward the HOA's tyranny ended. The endless rules, the constant letters, the control, all gone. No one dared enforce anything anymore. The community meetings stopped, the patrols ended, and the Maple Hollow website went dark. But while most felt relief, others felt unease. Because the whispering hadn't truly stopped, it had only grown subtler. Now when the fog rolled in thick and the moon disappeared, people heard the voices not from the yard but from inside their own homes. They waked to the sound of faint tapping on their windows, like fingers tracing patterns in the glass. And when they looked outside, they'd see the reflection of a pumpkin's grin glowing faintly in the dark, even when there wasn't one there. Maple Hollow had become quiet again, too quiet, and Ethan, the man who once just loved Halloween, now rarely smiled. He seemed tired, hollow-eyed, like he carried the weight of something unspeakable. Because every time he lit the candle inside that great jack-o'-lantern, the light flickered differently, as if something inside was trying to speak through the flame. And every night he thought he could hear the same soft whisper crawling through the air, saying his name over and over again. By mid-November, Maple Hollow had become unrecognizable. What was once the most picture-perfect neighborhood in the state now sat beneath a quiet, unnatural gloom. The air always seemed to smell faintly of rot, the streetlights flickered unpredictably, and the silence carried a weight that pressed against the lungs. The jack-o'-lantern at 43 Maple Drive still burned, never dimming, never dying. Its glow had become the only light that truly pierced the fog now. Even the moon seemed weaker near it. The neighbors began to avoid their windows altogether, closing blinds early and pretending not to hear the faint noises that crawled from Ethan's lawn. The HOA no longer existed in any real sense. Those who remained had stopped meeting altogether. Their emails went unanswered, their authority vanished. The once proud board members now stayed hidden in their immaculate homes, trembling at shadows. Those who dared walk their dogs after dark often returned pale, shaking, muttering about whispers from the drains or footsteps in the fog that didn't belong to anyone human. Then came the letters. Each house on Maple Hollow received one, sealed in orange wax with a carved pumpkin emblem pressed into the seal. No one knew who delivered them. The envelopes had no return address, no stamps, just names, written in perfect cursive. The letters were invitations. They spoke of a celebration, a neighborhood gathering to honor the season and restore unity. The date, November 20th, the location, 43 Maple Drive. No one wanted to go, but something about the letters compelled them. Some said the paper felt warm, others swore it whispered when they held it too close to the light. No one admitted it aloud, but everyone felt the same pull, a quiet insistence deep in the chest that said you must attend. And so, on the night of the 20th, Maple Hollow came alive again. Cars lined the street, porch lights flickered to life. The neighbors stepped out of their homes like moths drawn to flame, each carrying a dish as instructed: pumpkin pie, roasted seeds, pumpkin bread, soup. Every dish contained the same ingredient, the same scent. Ethan's house was unrecognizable. The decorations had multiplied, hundreds of pumpkins, each glowing faintly, lining the path to his door. Their carved faces varied, some smiling, others weeping, others twisted into expressions of terror. The massive jack-o'-lantern at the center of the yard loomed over it all, its grin wider, deeper, alive. The grass around it had died, replaced by dry, cracked soil. The neighbors gathered in silence. The fog thickened, curling around their ankles. There was no sound except for the faint hum of the pumpkin lights, and then the great jack-o'-lantern began to glow brighter, pulsing like a heart. The smaller pumpkins followed suit, flickering in unison until the entire yard throbbed with light. The air shimmered with heat though the night was cold. The neighbors felt it before they saw it, a vibration in the earth, a slow rumble that shook the soil. The massive jack-o'-lantern cracked open slightly at the base and a thick, glowing liquid seeped out, pooling at its stem like molten amber. The neighbors stared, unable to move, their feet rooted to the ground. The air buzzed with invisible energy, something ancient, heavy, sentient. The glow intensified until it blinded them, and then the laughter began. It wasn't a recording, it wasn't a prank. It was hundreds of overlapping voices, shrill, broken, human. They rose from the pumpkins all around, echoing through the fog like a choir of the damned. Each carved face contorted, the edges shifting as if made of flesh, mouths opening and closing in rhythm with the sound. In the great jack-o'-lantern's grin, a figure appeared, faint, transparent, human-shaped. Its form flickered like flame, features melting in and out of view. It was Maggie. Her eyes burned with orange fire, her mouth stretching wider than any human's could. She hovered inside the glow, her voice joining the chorus, part scream, part laughter. And then came another face, Carol Jennings, the HOA vice president, emerging beside her, twisted and unrecognizable. One by one, new faces appeared in the light, every person who had vanished since Halloween. Their features blurred, but their voices were clear. They begged to be freed, they pleaded for release. But Ethan stood at the edge of his porch, unmoving. His face was pale but calm, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He had become something else now, not victim, not man, but keeper. Guardian of the harvest, master of the punishment that had taken root in Maple Hollow. The ground trembled again. The smaller pumpkins split open, spilling the same glowing substance across the soil. The scent was sweet, intoxicating, pumpkin flesh and burning sugar mixed with something older, darker. The neighbors couldn't look away. Their fear dissolved into fascination. Their bodies swayed to the rhythm of the glowing light, and then the vines began to move. They slithered from beneath the pumpkins, coiling around ankles, crawling up legs. The neighbors didn't resist. They stood still, eyes wide, as the vines wrapped around their arms, their torsos, their throats. The light grew unbearable, searing through the fog. One by one they began to vanish, absorbed into the light, pulled toward the massive jack-o'-lantern. The glowing liquid hissed as it swallowed them whole, leaving only silence and the faint scent of charred leaves. When the last neighbor was gone, the yard fell still again. The fog began to clear, revealing nothing but the single massive pumpkin glowing faintly, peacefully. The carved grin had changed once more. Now it bore dozens of new faces within it, faint and distorted, carved so intricately they almost looked alive. Ethan stepped forward, candle in hand. He knelt before the jack-o'-lantern, placed the candle inside, and whispered something under his breath. The light steadied, the laughter stopped, only the faint hum of the earth remained, and when morning came, Maple Hollow looked clean again. No cars, no people, no sound, just a row of empty houses with untouched lawns and one home at the center still glowing faintly in the dawn light. The pumpkin feast of Maple Hollow was never spoken of again. There were no police reports, no news stories, no missing persons alerts. The world outside forgot the place even existed. But sometimes, on cold autumn nights, travelers passing through the valley claim to see a faint orange glow through the trees, a soft, rhythmic pulse like a beating heart, and they swear they can hear faint laughter carried on the wind. Winter crept over Maple Hollow like a shroud. Snow fell where screams once echoed, blanketing the empty neighborhood in perfect, sterile white. The air no longer carried the scent of rot or smoke, just silence, cold and complete. The wind moved through hollow houses, through broken blinds and forgotten toys, whispering stories to no one. And yet even beneath the snow something lived. Beneath the frozen soil of 43 Maple Drive, the roots pulsed faintly, thick, tangled vines that spread like veins beneath the entire street. They moved slowly, deliberately, feeding off something ancient and restless. The jack-o'-lantern still stood on the lawn, untouched by frost. Its glow was dim now, a faint ember beneath the ice, but it breathed. The snow around it never settled, melting instantly in a perfect circle. Ethan hadn't been seen since the night of the pumpkin feast. His house remained locked, his truck unmoved, his windows black. The mail piled up on his porch, half buried in drifts. Some said he left. Others whispered he had become part of what he created, that he was no longer human at all. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly the world forgot Maple Hollow existed. The GPS stopped recognizing the street. The town removed it from their directories. Maps blurred the area into a blank patch of forest. Only the wind remembered. Then one night deep in January, the snow began to melt. It started slowly, a drip from the gutters, a trickle down the storm drain. Then all at once the temperature rose unnaturally high and the snow retreated like frightened prey. Steam hissed from the ground and the air filled with that familiar smell again, burnt sugar and decay. The jack-o'-lantern was glowing once more. Its grin had changed again, wider, sharper, crueler. The faint faces carved into its skin seemed to move beneath the surface, their features distorted in silent screams. The light inside flickered like a pulse, faster, hungrier. The vines beneath the snow began to rise again, cracking through the frozen soil like serpents tasting the air. Something was returning. In the distance, headlights cut through the fog. A car slowed to a stop at the entrance of Maple Hollow, a pair of travelers lost on a winter road. Their GPS had glitched, rerouting them here to a place that shouldn't exist anymore. They saw the empty houses, the lifeless street, and at the center the faint orange glow. Curiosity led them forward. Footsteps crunched through wet snow. The air grew thick, heavy, almost sweet. They reached 43 Maple Drive and stopped. The house looked untouched by time, its porch clean, its windows intact. The jack-o'-lantern stood before it, alive with heat and light, melting the ground beneath it. The travelers didn't notice the soil shifting behind them. They didn't see the vines curling around their ankles until it was too late. A heartbeat later, the fog swallowed them whole. The next morning, the snow was pristine again, but the jack-o'-lantern's surface bore two new faces, faintly etched, still wet, and that was how it began anew. The power that lived inside the pumpkin had grown restless during the long silence. It needed new life, new fear, new worship. The souls of Maple Hollow had not been enough. Their energy had fed it, but something stronger had been missing: the source. The spirit that had started it all. Beneath the roots, beneath the soil and frozen earth, something ancient stirred. It was Maggie Ellison, or what was left of her. Her essence had been trapped for months within the pulsing core of the great jack-o'-lantern. The faces carved into its surface were her prisoners, but her soul, her hatred, remained awake. And now it wanted out. The ground cracked open one icy dawn. The vines pulsed with light, their tendrils moving in perfect rhythm. The pumpkin split down the center with a sound like thunder. Inside, the air burned orange and red, swirling with ash and embers. A figure rose from the molten glow, skeletal, veined with roots, her eyes twin flames of vengeance. It was Margaret Ellison, reborn as something new, something terrible. The pumpkin witch of Maple Hollow. Her form was human no longer. Her hair was made of vines, her fingers of bark and bone. Her face still bore the faint elegance of the woman she once was, but twisted by fury and hunger. She stepped from the pumpkin, the snow sizzling beneath her feet. Wherever she walked, frost melted and the ground steamed. The air hummed as she lifted her gaze toward the sky. The clouds split and the moonlight bent toward her. She remembered everything: the night of the fire, the laughter, the trap, the punishment. Ethan's smile as she vanished into the glow. Now she wanted retribution. The pumpkin witch spread her arms wide and the vines erupted from the soil, tearing through the frozen lawns and streets, reclaiming Maple Hollow. Every house cracked as roots burst through foundations, curling around mailboxes and lampposts. The vines glowed faintly within her fire, pulsing with the same rhythm as her heart. And deep within Ethan's house, something stirred in response. The windows glowed faintly orange from within. The walls groaned and the air filled with whispers. His presence was still there, not human anymore, but something else, something that had merged with the energy of the curse. As the pumpkin witch advanced toward his door, the ground trembled beneath her. The porch light flickered. The great jack-o'-lantern behind her reignited, brighter than ever, its glow casting long shadows that moved like living things. For a moment she hesitated, not out of fear but recognition. She could feel him watching her. The one who had condemned her, the one who had created her prison. And though no words passed between them, something old and terrible hung in the air, an understanding between two forces that could no longer die. The pumpkin witch had returned, and Ethan Cole, wherever he now existed, would have to face what he had unleashed. The harvest was not over. It was only beginning. The night of the final harvest began without warning. The air in Maple Hollow turned orange before sunset, a strange, unnatural hue that spread across the horizon like the glow of an unseen fire. The streets that no longer existed shimmered back into being. Houses that had crumbled reassembled themselves. Perfect and sterile once more, as though time itself were rewinding. For the first time in months, the street was whole again, but it was not alive. The wind carried the scent of scorched earth and sweet decay. The trees trembled, their bare branches bending inward as if bowing to something ancient. And there in the heart of the neighborhood stood the great jack-o'-lantern, no longer just decoration, no longer symbol. It had become an altar. The pumpkin witch stood before it, her body pulsing with orange light. Her veins glowed like molten glass and her hair of vines moved with the rhythm of a living thing. Around her, the smaller pumpkins flickered to life, forming a circle that stretched across every yard, every porch, every street corner. The souls trapped within them whispered softly, their carved mouths moving in endless murmurs. Some pleaded, some laughed, some simply waited. The final harvest had begun. Beneath the soil, the roots spread outward like wildfire. They dug deep, piercing through the foundations of every home, feeding on whatever remained of the lives that once filled them: photos, toys, forgotten objects, all swallowed by the earth. The energy of those memories fed the witch, and with every pulse she grew stronger. But something stirred within the house at 43 Maple Drive. The windows glowed again, brighter than before, brighter even than the witch's light. A sound came from within, deep and resonant, like a heartbeat too large for the world to contain. The door creaked open, though no one stood behind it. And then a shape emerged. It was Ethan, or what was left of him. He was no longer flesh, his body made of ash, bone, and the same molten light that powered the pumpkins. His eyes burned with calm fire, his steps left scorched prints in the soil. The witch paused as he approached, her head tilting slightly, a flicker of recognition passing through her molten eyes. The two forces faced one another, creator and creation, bound by the same curse. No words were exchanged, but the air between them trembled with meaning. Ethan had built the first pumpkin from anger, from pride, from a desire for revenge. Now that same creation stood before him, wearing the face of the woman he condemned. They were mirrors of one another, both corrupted by the same hunger for justice. The ground split open beneath their feet, lava-colored light poured from the cracks. The smaller pumpkins began to melt, their carved faces liquefying into streams of fire that flowed toward the great one at the center. The whispers rose into screams not of pain but release. The trapped souls were awakening. Ethan lifted his hand and the jack-o'-lantern behind him flared to life. Its glow rose skyward like a pillar of flame. The pumpkin witch answered, her own energy surging through the vines that spread across the street. The entire neighborhood shook, houses collapsing into ash as the power of both forces collided. Flame met flame. Light met light. The witch screamed, a sound like 1,000 storms. Ethan's body cracked, molten veins splitting across his skin. The pumpkins exploded around them one by one, sending shards of glowing pulp into the fog. The earth beneath Maple Hollow heaved and roared, then silence. For a heartbeat the world froze. The two figures stood in perfect stillness, their lights intertwined, neither winning, neither yielding. Then Ethan stepped forward. His hand reached toward her, not in anger but in surrender. The witch hesitated, her eyes flickered, the fury inside her trembling like a dying flame. For a moment the wind seemed to hold its breath, and then they touched. The explosion was soundless, just a wave of light spreading outward in perfect stillness, washing over Maple Hollow like dawn breaking after an eternal night. The fire didn't burn, it purified. The houses dissolved into dust. The pumpkins melted into earth. The vines retracted, crumbling into ash. When the light faded, nothing remained. The street was gone. The houses were gone. Only a single field of blackened soil stretched beneath the pale dawn sky. In the center, one pumpkin remained, small, uncarved, untouched. It sat in perfect stillness, dew glistening on its surface, the air around it peaceful. And deep within its core, two faint lights glowed, one orange, one gold, pulsing together in quiet rhythm. For the first time since that cursed Halloween, the land was still. The curse had ended. The hunger had been fed, the vengeance complete. Ethan and the witch had merged into something beyond life and death, the harvest reclaimed by its maker. Weeks later, travelers passing through the forest noticed something strange. The area where Maple Hollow once stood had become fertile again, wildflowers blooming from black soil, trees bearing fruit out of season. Birds sang, the air was clean, and the faint scent of pumpkins lingered after rain. But locals whispered that sometimes, if you walk that field at twilight, you can still hear faint laughter carried by the wind, not cruel or mocking but soft, grateful. And if you look closely, when the last light of day touches that single pumpkin, you might see two shadows inside, one man, one woman standing side by side, watching over the place that once knew only pride and punishment. The pumpkin witch had returned, but now she was no longer bound by rage. Now she was the guardian of what remained, a reminder of the power that sleeps in every seed of vengeance, waiting for someone to plant it again. Because every harvest begins the same way. With a single pumpkin, and a single soul willing to light the flame.